Oh, yeah.
Well, friends, we're so glad to have Wes back with us. I mean, you went to Pennsylvania?
Maryland.
Or Maryland? I don't know, somewhere up there.
Mary's
Yeah.
land.
That's right. Somewhere with the Yankees up there is all I know. But very grateful to have him back for week 2. Last week was so beneficial. I know this week will be as well. I wanted to remind everybody, 1, happy Mother's Day to all. And 2, this Tuesday we'll have our second week of Shoals Theology Tuesday. So we started off with our I guess you call our demo group this past week, but we're hoping to build momentum around that. We're going to have a special leader with us leading discussion this next week, Ryan Young, who's a Cumberland Presbyterian guy, very like-minded with us. We had this past week Jake from across the street, the priest for St. Bart's, was with us, and he'll continue to be with us over the next few weeks. And so we're grateful for that. You know, we like to have the Episcopalians, the Cumberlands, the PCUSA folks, everybody together. But anyway, take it away.
Well, it's so good to see all of you again. And last week I know we didn't get into a lot of discussion because I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself and about the way that I would approach the topic of science and faith. And what I hope you walked away with was that, and we were just talking about this, is that people of faith can read and interpret science in the context of their faith, and people of science can be people of faith. And those things don't have to be exclusive. We need to be, as people of the 21st century, we should be enlightened and educated about the things that are going on in our world. We should constantly think about the things that challenge our faith. And today I want to bring up some topics that people of faith have had trouble with in the 21st century. And just maybe talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to ask, did anyone have any thoughts about last week or anything that we talked about that that you thought about over the past week? That's okay if not.
Well, it's been a week. You know?
It has been a week. And we touched a little bit, last week we touched a little bit on evolution. We read a little Darwin. We talked about the first chapter of Genesis. We hit a lot of topics. One thing that I was reading this week, and I would like to read it to you toward the end, is Pope John Paul II, who was a professor of philosophy, I do believe, wrote a treatise on science and faith. And some of the, I didn't read the whole thing. It's several hundred pages long. I'd like to buy a book and read it at some point. But the summary, the summary chapter has some good points in it, and I thought it was very enlightening. So, does anyone want to throw out a topic that has been in the news or something that you personally have been challenged as a person of faith? Anything that you can come up with? Because I've got some ideas, but.
I think the most public concern that we have, not just as Christians but also as believers, is artificial intelligence and the almost idolatrous obsession and the uncritical confidence that we have that somehow these great systems of mechanical intelligence are equal to and even better than human wisdom. And I think it's dangerous. It shows the damage that science, not intentionally, but science poses to our humanity, because robotics, and we hear constantly out of the newspaper that they're quicker, they're smarter, they can synthesize much better, but never is the issue of true humane and divine wisdom ever, because they don't talk about it that way. And I find it to be dangerous, unsettling, and just another step in the degradation of spirit, frankly, never mind the divine spirit.
Yeah. Artificial intelligence is something that we hear a lot about, and it's something that we think about in the context of almost every part of our modern lives. Whether it's using artificial intelligence to manipulate photographs for humorous intent, or whether it's using artificial intelligence for professionals to make diagnoses like a physician to make a diagnosis in the exam room. There are a lot of pitfalls that come with this expanding knowledge. Not only the way that these AI models train themselves, because that's part of what they do. They train themselves. They're built to synthesize large volumes of data, and to use, and a lot of it is predictive intelligence, where they're predicting what word comes after the next. And so when you read something that's been created by artificial intelligence, there are potentially biases and other things that go into that. And you have to be aware that what you're listening to, and this is something that we're seeing in medicine, is that the public can be misled because the AI models can seem so convincing and can be completely wrong about a topic, and can lead people down a path that may hurt themselves or someone else. So I think it's important to make sure that we, as critical people, understand that that what is coming out in the news and what we're reading, what we're digesting through our phones or through social media, might have not necessarily, it could be nefarious intent, but it could also just be incorrect. And we've seen this with, there was a case recently, I know many people have seen it, where a lawyer was punished for using an AI model, and then the AI model gave them ghost references that didn't exist. And this has also been true in medicine, where people, I was listening to a recent webinar about AI, and does everyone know what a postdoctoral fellow is? So you go and get your PhD, and then you go on to do research in a lab. And it's a very prestigious thing to go on to do this, and then that's usually what gets your entry into another institution. This postdoctoral fellow asked an AI model to make them a resume. No, I'm sorry. This PhD asked them to give them a resume. It hallucinated that this person had done a postdoctoral fellowship, even though the person had given them all the information. It just stuck that in there because it thought that the person probably had done a postdoctoral fellowship because of where they worked and all those things. They were doing it as an example. Now, this person wasn't doing it to create their resume. They have a resume. It was just showing the dangers of what artificial intelligence can do. So I think it is very fascinating, but also could be very, very dangerous.
And it's dumb.
It is dumb.
In the most important ways, it's dumb.
Yeah.
It may not remain dumb, but right now it's very dumb.
Right.
The second thing it is what we have seen throughout the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution and the Renaissance and every other cognitive revolution in the West. What was the first thing that we used Boyle's breakthroughs in unlocking the power of the atom? What was the first thing it was used for?
Hiroshima.
Exactly. It was used to kill. Now, I want to believe that Boyle, I don't know that much about it, but I want to believe that he and that team of scientists over in Oak Ridge and other places who worked on this project thought, well, this would be a marvelous contribution to our need for energy. But either they or the US government, the first thought was, well, we can kill people with this. This is a great tool. And the second thing that I think is dumb about this society's approach to artificial intelligence is you must notice, what is the principal use of it already? Commercial transaction.
Yeah.
It's to convince you to buy something, use something, avail yourself of a service. That's what it's going to be used for.
And the other thing that I see it being used for, and this is just peripherally, is because I'm not in that space, but it's completely changing the way students learn. Because the education system has not yet figured out how to catch up with what AI can do. These models can generate, so, trying to figure out if someone used AI is becoming something that's dependent on AI. So it seems like we're getting into these loops of thinking where we're using AI to decipher AI because you don't know if someone used AI, because then did they really learn? So I was talking to an educator recently who is a professor at a university, and asking them how they approach learning in the AI era. And you have to rethink about you have to focus on getting students to explain their thought process, not producing an outcome, because that outcome could be they could have used some other source. It's almost like plagiarism to get that answer. So that's another thing that scares me personally, is what it means for those individuals that are going through school right now, whether that's higher education or even secondary education, because everyone's using it. They just don't know how. They don't know how to stop it and what to do with it.
I don't want, I'll
Yeah.
stop talking. But this reminds me of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, where the young apprentice sees that, was it Merlin who had the powers to clean a room because he could enchant, right? Remember the mops and all that, he could enchant them. And so he leaves, and his apprentice is left behind. He says, well, I can do that. And I remember what he uses as chant. So he conjures up the magic of the brooms, remember? And what happens? They get loose on him. And I think that observation you made is the machines are seductive and enchanting, because the student, it's happening over UNA. I was over there for years, and the Chinese were never taught that cheating is wrong. That was not a part of their culture. Part of the way you got on in China is cheat. You cheat in everything. And they would buy papers and submit them. And there's a whole, a whole commercial market of buying
Absolutely.
our AI. And it's enchanting because, hey, if you've waited till the last minute for an all-nighter, as we used to call them, and you need it, and you don't feel good because you've been out at a party the night before and you need sleep, if you can use artificial intelligence to basically manifest what is responsibility that was given to you to try to synthesize and understand some area, boy, that's enchanting.
Yeah.
It's seductive.
Yeah, and it's almost democratized cheating too, because you can. When I was in medical school, I didn't know this was happening, because I can be honest with you, I have never cheated a day in my life. One time I looked over and saw an answer on a student's paper, and I marked it wrong because I felt bad. I'm just not a person who does that. That is just not in me. I was made aware later, after medical school, that there were old tests floating around among certain groups who had an in with other students who they knew from fraternities or whatever it was in the past, that they had connections. So, there were some that they were sort of in the know, and then others that weren't. And then, and like you said, with AI, you could just say, it's not free, but, in ways it's accessible. And it's not, and it doesn't matter if you've got the answers from a source. You can just get it from the machine. So anyway, so I think that's a great observation. I love the fact that we got to talk about AI. I didn't even think about AI in the context of faith, but I think it's a very good example of some of the struggles that we have. But go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the when you were tying back to religion, that what AI encourages is just plain old-fashioned laziness. Mm-hmm. It makes it incredibly easy
just a shortcut.
Yeah, shortcut, or do this, and throughout history and religion, whenever God's people got lazy, bad things usually happen.
I'll pipe up here as a 29-year-old just for a second. I want to give a book pitch. A mentor of mine, Dr. Dan Scott out of Nashville, he's an Anglican priest, but he wrote a book called Faith in the Age of AI, and it's a phenomenal book. And it exactly addresses this question. But two, I think, my father, he works in software development for very large medical companies, insurance and that kind of thing. Cigna's work with all over, and he's led teams, and it's a big topic right now because everybody's like, in the next 5 years, at least the entry-level positions will lose their jobs. So we tell people to go into the natural sciences instead of the technological sciences because there's not going to be jobs there. And what he sees and what I kind of see on the peripheral right now is kind of like at any point in technological advancement where there is large criticism that's needed, just like we're giving in this room, but the criticism's not going to stop the effect.
Right.
And so what we have to figure out how to do is how do we utilize this in a way that has integrity and interact with it in a way that's useful. One way that I'll mention, even for a small organization, if we want to call Westminster a small organization like ourselves, is we can't afford, for instance, like a graphic design artist. We can't afford one. But now, because of artificial intelligence, we can look like we afford one. You know what I'm saying? We can afford one. And so there are ways, like anything, in which there can be benefits. There's pros and cons to anything. And the main question that we're wrestling with is how do we deal with AI with faith and integrity and utilize this as a tool for good instead of, for harm. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, those are great points.
But don't you think, AI is a fairly new topic in a lot of ways. But we've always had, for years, as long as we've had the beginnings of technology, we've always had AI. It's just like somebody's put a new name and they've taken it to the next level.
And
Well,
that's
just-
part of the con.
And just,
That's
and
part
just,
of the con.
and just remember that, if you've ever had used spell check,
Yeah.
that's AI. But think about it more that the AI not only has been around for a while, it was theorized forever ago by some very famous scientists, some of which were used to crack the Enigma code. If you've seen, these. But I wanted to go back to something you said, because it's something that I think about a lot, and I think I wrestle with as a person of faith, and I don't know if you do, is about our preoccupation with war and our military spending. So, I'm not here to tell you anything that you don't already know, but I want you to think a little bit about the amount of money that we spend and what it means. You've already mentioned that advancements are generally, and this is something I was thinking about the other day, to be honest, this last week, was that, can someone name something that we all use that was invented for military use that is now something we use, almost every one of us use every single day?
Microwave?
I don't know if microwaves were invented by the U.S. military, but probably. GPS was invented by the U.S. military. In the allowed consumer use of GPS allows it to be used within a certain radius, but the military's GPS is much, 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 much more accurate. But they allow GPS to be used in context so that we can use it to drive around. And so I think that's something interesting. The internet was designed for to communicate inside the U.S. military.
Well, we're in a war right now.
Absolutely.
In which there's no place you can go that Uncle Sam, boys and girls, can't find you. Now, and they bragged about it.
Right.
See, I'm a conservative Republican who supports Trump, but I also find it dangerous and disturbing that our president and his Secretary of Defense get up and talk about war like it's a 12-year-old, a group of 12-year-olds talking about their war games on the computer. These are human lives at stake. And I think that shows the degradation of science and the tools of war that has occurred for all of us, because it's a game. It's a game. Okay, we don't count the cost. We don't consider. Our leaders stand up and brag as though we're the greatest nation on earth, and that's true. But I think the first AI was manifest at the Tower of Babel, because the story goes that they built great cities with AI, with culture. They organized architecture so that the societies could be sustained. They had sophisticated social and political, and they raised great structures, dazzling cities. And in the story, they didn't see the danger, but God did. He said, these people are so arrogant, they think they have no fear. And I think the thing that I think is most fearsome is we are fighting a war today as a result of AI in the discovery of nuclear power applied for nuclear warfare. Our president has said, and I guess rightly so, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Ironically, we do. We don't want them to have it. We opened Pandora's box. Truman knew it. That team knew it. This is Pandora's box. There's risk here.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like what you suggested, Trey. We thought, oh, we can handle it. And how did we manage it? We had to manage it with a concept that had never been considered in the history of diplomacy and politics. Mutually, now how's this for a contradiction? And a condemnation of our sin. Mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
That's a concept that is so paradoxical.
And I think it's interesting to talk about death because you think about warfare in the context of death and what you were talking about, the fact that we are waging war not necessarily with guns, but with keystrokes. And it still costs real human life. And human life is sacred. And we should never lose the fact that war has real cost, and it affects real people with sons and daughters and grandparents. And just because they're a world away and we don't see it doesn't mean it's not real. And I was thinking about this week as well. I read this really interesting book, and it was, and I will get you the name if you'd like to read about it. But it was talking about death, particularly in the context of the Civil War. And back then, the Victorian ideal of death was that people died peacefully and that they had the best intentions on their mind. So they used to write things and put them in soldiers' pockets that would be love letters to their parents, so that their parents would know or think that the last thing on their mind was their families. And then in World War I, people saw destruction on a scale that they could not imagine. It annihilated people's perceptions of humanity, because you're talking about rapid fire machine guns and trench warfare and chemical weapons and some of the things that could be unimaginable for us today. And then World War II, we moved into a different era, and then into the Cold War, and then now we're in the information age. But at the end of this, we are still a people grappling with our own humanity, and we need to find a place where you as an individual have to discern what is right for you and what it means to you as a person that walks around in this world and pays taxes and is a citizen of humanity, but also a citizen of the United States, and what that means for you and your elected officials. I think that's really an important thing to think about. Another topic, if anybody wants to further that topic, another topic I was interested in to hear people's thoughts about was the environmental movement. Has anyone had any concerns about, or have ever thought about environmentalism in the context of faith? You particularly, but also other, maybe what you've heard about in the news.
Well, I think I've always seen environmentalism as something of God, because God created all this environment that we live in. And we have been asked to be stewards of that. So if we are not doing our job to be stewards, to care for the living creatures and the living beauty that God has created, we're not doing our part. We're not doing what He asks us to do. And I think I remember when Greenpeace would would get a little bit carried away and bomb ships that were whaling or whatever they were doing, you know. I think there can be extremes in anything. So we have some extreme environmentalists. We also have some extreme anti-environmentalists, people who say, well, but the land is there for us to use, so we're going to use it. And who cares that they're endangered species on that?
You hit on exactly what I wanted to bring up, was these two competing ideals, and there are competing ideals. For some individuals, environmentalism is a farce, and for others, it is part of their faith journey. And you know, we have to understand that people can. I was going to read this. Well, now I know I read this last week, but if everyone has heard this verse. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So there are people that take exactly what you said, that we are commanded to have mastery over this creation. And so it doesn't make sense that we do what we want with it because of this verse. Does anyone know what translation I'm reading? Just a guess. King James. All right, so I want to read the translation that I read last week, and I know we talked about it, called the Jewish Publication Society, the JPS version of this same verse. God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth. You know, I think that I think there's a lot we can put into words. We need to be careful and understand that the words that we read have different ways of being expressed in our language, but also they're translations of another language. So just be cautious when you read things, because they're coming from one from the other.
Would you go back and read that again?
Sure.
Out of the King James Version?
Sure. That's why I told you I like my...
And while we wait for that, you know, a couple weeks ago, of course, we talked about in 11 o'clock, this idea that Hebrew word actually means to make useful, which is so cultivate. And then you see the tradition within the ancient Hebrews informing the rest of Scripture. You know, a good man treats his beast well, and so on. I've always said, you know, we oftentimes, if we're not for promoting a healthy environment, we're forgetting we are the environment. Human being, we're part of this thing. And when you have an asthma attack because of pollution is so high, then suddenly you'll wake up to the fact, oh, maybe we should care for the environment.
Yeah. So reading that again, and this is from King James Version, Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth.
Okay. The one word you said in that one that I didn't hear in the other one was replenish. Okay, so my version is the English Standard Version. It doesn't have replenish in it. So it makes me wonder, is that if we interpret things from one time to the other, at one time evidently, when somebody was interpreting the scriptures or what they thought were the scriptures, they thought it was important to include the word replenish, which I take as that's what an environmentalist would do. Use the earth, use the fish, use the timber, use whatever you need to use, but replenish it. Don't take too much, restore it. And as you go to maybe a newer version, you don't hear replenish. So maybe as we got smarter, we thought there's no end to this.
Yeah.
There's no end to this. But if the words that they transcribed and the thoughts in the King James Version, not saying it's any better than the other, but the word replenish, if you believe in that, then you're an environmentalist. If you don't believe in that, I'm just gonna use it for whatever I can get out of it. I'm gonna use it for my own personal, I'm gonna use it to make money, I'm gonna use it for this, I'm gonna use it for that. I'm not worried about the next generation because I won't be here. I'll have mine.
Okay, so going on to that, the second thing that you hear in some circles is sort of the and if you pray, maybe you can help me remember. It's what's the rapture movement? But
well, it's completely made up. It's less than
exactly. So what I'm saying is that so you can see how this would fit into a certain theology. If you were a person who believes
that God's going to burn up the world,
right, and it's going to come soon, and there's no reason for us to care because the future is just the literal destruction of the earth. That's what's going to happen. We're going to be zapped up to heaven, and everybody else is going to burn. And I think it's fascinating to think about that from that perspective because I was in a conversation with a person in this town who was talking to another person, and the thing that came out of their mouth was, "Oh, it doesn't matter because Jesus is coming back anyway." That was it.
Completely missing the whole message was a new earth, a new heavens and a
because
new
in the Bible it always describes as heaven coming down to earth. If you go back and read different interpretations or different, especially in Revelation, it was heaven coming down to earth, and a new heaven, a new earth. So anyway, so very interesting to think that there are people out there who use faith to defend their own thinking about the way that we take care of our world.
I'd like to continue with that because there's an interesting thing. Paul later on, thousands of years after this, Paul talks about our mastery as, first of all, God's mastery of us, the mastery of a slave over a slave, and husbands' mastery of their wives, remember?
Mm-hmm.
But Paul defines it in terms of two factors. It's not just we have mastery over the earth, but we are subjected to some other end, which is, and Augustine picked this up with two words. They're both roots of Latin for words that we use today, udi and fruti. In creation, we are called to use creation, like Trey said, and also, but to use it in service and praise of God. See? So you renew upward. You use horizontally, but you use upward because the end is not the garden itself. The end is the gardener who made it, see? And I think frui is the other word. And Augustine said the problem with human existence is we have reversed the location between using and serving and glorifying. We glorify and serve, and we are idolatrous about objects, and we use God to be religious. See, we reverse that relationship. We bend everything. Our relationship to the world is supposed to be ultimately to the living God, the creator, the king, the ruler, the Lord, right? But we have made things that.
Yeah. If we could follow too, Wes's thought too, out of Genesis, we see this overarching even in how all those boring books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy and so on, there's some pretty interesting stuff in there. And then you see that God actually has his people not do anything to the land for a series of years, so that way the land can recover and recoup. And to make sure to plant an excess so passerbyers, we might say the homeless, can take from the fields, and it wasn't called stealing, it was, and so you see this idea that built into the people of God early on is God defines making something useful as something that's also good for the thing that's being made useful, not just taking from it, but dignifying it. It's a good thing for it as well.
And in that Jubilee, also you had, if you loan something, according to the Jubilee, which was the sixth or seventh year. Yes, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you have to remit it.
Yeah.
If somebody loaned you money, they paid it back over a period of 6 years, but in the seventh, it was a remission. See?
And remember too that in either Leviticus or one of the books, it does God condemns usury or usurious behavior, and excessive amounts of interest.
Yeah.
So there are real what you're saying that God was teaching people in the context of what they were and the way that they could think about how to be people to live in a way that is godlike. And remember these, we think you mentioned the boring books and that there are great things in there. There's wonderful stories. And these were, again, we go back to what we talked about last week. These were people living on the edge. These were people that were living in small huddles in an arid landscape around these tiny little city states. And I'm talking about the ancient Hebrews, the ancient Canaanites. In this small, tiny little pocket of the world where things didn't grow very well, and they didn't have a lot of water, and so most of their cities were around springs, and they were a very agricultural society. That's why many of the things that happen in the Bible have agricultural contexts. These were people who, and so God had to relate to them in some way, and they had to relate to God in some way, just like we do today. Where we are not in that society, but we as critically thinking individuals can read these stories fresh, and we should read these stories fresh, and because they are alive with meaning and they're alive with interpretation. We should also remember that God is transcendent. God is truly other, but in a way God is still relational, because otherwise what is faith? What are we doing if we don't believe that God is relational to us? It has something for us. So I think these are great thoughts that we're having today. We're thinking a lot about the way that we should walk in our day-to-day lives, and the way we should relate to each other, the way we relate to our community and our towns, the way that we relate to our country, and how we should be, everything we should be doing, we should be thinking very critically, because we're living in a time where we are in danger of losing these critical voices, and I don't think it's an age thing, but in some ways there's a lot of what generations past can teach us, and those that are present in today from previous generations have so much to teach us about what we need, how we need to approach modern humanity. And we don't need to lose that. In losing that, we're losing voices, and we're going to be worse off for it. I truly believe that.
That's why I think, people that, I know of a person very close to me that, and says, well, it's not gonna be long before Jesus comes back. So it's not that that person does wrong and not anticipating punishment, so to speak.
Right.
Doesn't do bad things, but it's like, I don't have to think about this other stuff because it's not gonna be long to the end. And so it's kind of like an out.
Yeah.
I don't have to think about this. I don't have to deal with this. I don't have to do it. And it's kind of like, going back to the word, the word replenish just hit me, is that if we don't, replenish means you want to help those that come after you.
Yeah.
If you don't want to replenish, then it's just the here and now. It's just the here and now.
And following that line of thought, I know we're coming to a close here. I think about King Hezekiah, who followed, of course, after David and so on. Hezekiah, it's amazing to me. He seems like a good and decent guy. The Bible calls him wicked at the end of his life, but he seemed like a good guy because he managed things well and everything else. But the Bible says that he was a bad king because he said something right before he died. God had sent a prophet to him to tell him, hey, judgment is coming on your people. and it looks like y'all are going to go into slavery. And Hezekiah said, well, I'll be dead, so who cares? And because of that, because he didn't have a vision for the next generation, the Bible calls him a wicked and evil king.
Oh.
And it wasn't because he,
Interesting.
I mean, think about it. David killed a man and took his wife. And you have Solomon, who had this whole giant harem situation going on across, both the Hebrew people and the pagan world. And yet, we have this king who's called, and we can talk about them another day, but you have this king, the only point is to say that you have this king called evil simply because he didn't think about the next generation.
But see, we have a whole society.
Yeah.
We have a whole society. We are surrounded, okay, we are swimming in a sea of that kind of nihilism and meaninglessness. And it's not their fault in many instances. That's what our society has engendered. And it's also what science has created, because we now have a whole society that defines personality in terms of gender, sex, race, color, status. That's not humanity. That's dead. That's dead flesh. Okay? That means nothing. And we have people, I know I have a friend, when we get into heated conversations about politics or religion, at some point, the one person says to me, Dan, why do you care? You can't do anything about it. It's that same thing. And I just simply said, I'll always care. I'll never let meaninglessness and that break me, because and that's the hope in Christ Jesus, that this world means something, that God made a covenant that said, I am jealous, I love you, and I want you to live for me. You belong to me. That's powerful stuff. And that's where science gives us another kind of world, because quantum theory, Galileo, gravity theory, much of medicine doesn't need anyone. The pharmaceutical companies can make medicine without you. They don't need you. Religion's different. This wisdom we have been taught is about God's love for us and how we are so special, and we must live in that relationship. And that is our meaning. And that is our meaning.
And just a couple of things that I wanted to bring up real quickly, and then I'm going to read this from Pope John Paul II as we end. But one I was thinking was, you were just going back to a minute ago, we were talking about the scriptures being alive for our time. Remember that a lot of what Paul was dealing with were churches that were growing, because it's very clear in Acts that they felt that the return was near, because that had been prophesied. But they were coming, later in Paul's writings, which started, this was 20, 30 years after Jesus had died, they were starting to grow as going from the faith of Jesus to the faith about Jesus. So they were learning what it meant to be a church, or to be the nascent church of Christianity. But they also had to deal with things that were going on, and some of what Paul was writing about was this war between what he was talking about, is Jesus coming back? How do we deal with each other in the meantime? So again, go back through the scriptures and read what these people were thinking about, because it is relevant to us. All right, so I'm just going to read this really quickly, because I think it struck me. And I'm taking this out of context. I do believe that, but I just listened to the words. Finally, I cannot fail to address a word to scientists whose research offers an ever greater knowledge of the universe as a whole and of the incredibly rich array of its component parts, animate and inanimate, with their complex atomic and molecular structures. So far has science come, especially in this century, that its achievements never cease to amaze us. In expressing my admiration and offering encouragement to these brave pioneers of scientific research, to whom humanity owes so much of its current development, I would urge them to continue their efforts without ever abandoning the sapiential horizon within which scientific and technological achievements are wedded to the philosophical and ethical values which are distinctive and indelible mark of the human person. Scientists are well aware that the search for truth, even when it concerns a finite reality of the world or of man, is never ending, but always points to something points beyond to something higher than the immediate object of study, to the questions which give access to mystery. I think that's beautiful language for the way that science and faith can coexist, and we as humanity, which we will always be searching for answers. That's part of the way that God, part of what God gave us was reason, and to search, and we will always be searching. But we cannot lose that access to the mysterious, to the beyond, to what God has and is doing in this world. And I think it's a beautiful and exciting thing that we get to live into as human beings in the 21st century.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, I will not be here next week. We're going out of town, but then we'll pick up week after that.
Yeah, that'll be, yeah.
That's up to you.
Good.
You tell me.
Sounds
You
good.
just.
I say we, I know, Dan, how many weeks will you need, you think, for your seminar on Paul's traveling?
Well,
Will you need a series is my question, just,
yeah,
will you need more than
probably
one?
at least 8.
Okay, let me ask this real quick. Do y'all wanna take a week off next week and wait for Wes to come back? Or do you want, I have, some material that we can slow down and consider in terms of like approaches to creation, theistic evolution, asking questions, did God create through evolution? Did God, what was it? He spoke it and it all came in. You wanna do that next week? Or take a break? Sean? Okay, good, we'll do that.
Why
next
you
week.
got
that's one thing.
That's right.
One other thing, Pastor, Barb's brother just moved in with us, and this is Bruce, that tall guy.
Hey!
You're welcome him, and he's gifted musically. In fact, his relationship to Christianity has been heavily influenced by music. And secondly, he and I have spent a lot of time that he knows Scripture just about as well as anybody I've ever met, and it's all because of the training and exposure to the Navigators and some other groups. So, gosh, we really welcome him. And,
We're so glad to have you, absolutely, yes, sir, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate it. That was great.
Yeah. Oh, I'm only going to Montgomery this week.
You're the center of all knowledge.
That's what it is.
What is your doctorate?
Trey told me
Somebody.
So I said, we'll wait and see what happens.
Yes, yeah, I told him I didn't want to.
Excuse me, sorry. Yes, ma'am. Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day to you.